So what they did, they tracked these 52 horses for an average of 127 weeks, and they looked at the vet issues like orthopedic, soft tissue, respiratory, gastrointestinal, and also tracking their racing performance through the public database. Welcome everyone to episode 153 of the Sen Nutrition Podcast with your host Bryan and Peter today. And on today's episode, I hope you're sitting down because we are going to review a breakthrough study that has focused in on how a foal's gut health can predict their performance, and particularly this is to do with racehorses. How are you, Pete?
Brian, very well. I'm still on a straight and narrow, with my healthier diet and lack of drinking. But I think some of our listeners might need something a bit stiffer than an Underwood Chardonnay after we finish this podcast.
Yeah, it's actually a really good example, and this can apply to all performance horses, not just race horses. They've studied what is probably the elite, what you'd say in performance. Then we can draw a lot of conclusions from this study on how important gut health is right from that first 28 days of a foal.
Yeah, look, probably more specific to breeders sort of more than anyone. It's a little bit hard, obviously, for sort of people that are buying horses, which are 2-year-old, 3-year-old, because we don't really know the history with that particular horse, how it was sort of when it was a foal. But it's pretty eye-opening, and I'm glad there's obviously a concrete study, which is very recent as well. It's only about 12 months old, that actually went through and followed horses, obviously, for a particular period of time, which Bryan will outline shortly. And we've got some concrete evidence that we can discuss.
Yeah, this is really eye-opening, but also groundbreaking in terms of confirming what we knew, but then applying it to a really good sample size of horses and then following that through and getting the exact parameters to follow to really track the impact of how important that gut health is for a foal, and then also applying that to the mare's gut health as well. And it was a study in August 2024 called Early Life Gut Bacterial Community Structure Predicts Disease Risk and Athletic Performance in Horses Bred for Racing. And this is a UK study where they studied 52 thoroughbred racehorses and looked at how the impact of the first 28 days of their life as a foal through to their 3-year-old racing performance.
Yeah, well, that's almost the equivalent, obviously, with young kids when they're born. Obviously, the first sort of couple of months are critical. So with the foals, there's not that much difference. We're still, working with nature. And it's good that we've got some, as I said, we've got some evidence of what we've been trying to preach for the last sort of 11 years, soon going on to 12 years next year. That message to obviously, have some sort of science literature to prove that point, that we have been sort of on the right train for a while.
Yeah, and even saying how early gut health predicts later race performance is pretty groundbreaking. And what we're talking about here is the horse's hindgut, and it's not their stomach where ulcers can arise. It's not the small intestine where the sugar, the starch, the protein, and the fat is digested. It's the hindgut of the horse, which includes the cecum, the large colon, and the small colon, and the rectum. And this whole part is where the fermentation of fiber happens. It is 60 to 70% of your horse's daily fuel and aerobic energy needs. It really is the epicenter of their immune cells. 70% of it is there. So when you look at this part of the horse and what its function is, it's no wonder it impacts a horse's performance and health later on. And we'll put an asterisk there. It's not just performance, it's actually linking it to respiratory issues, gut issues, and metabolic issues later in life.
Look, there's a reason why that probably gut health segment is probably the highest with supplements on the market. So 11 years ago when we started, gut health wasn't really a big issue. And look, we've been sort of at the forefront with maintaining a healthy gut, fiber fermentation. We all know horses are vegetarians, they ferment fiber. Obviously, they do need some starch and sugar, but, the devil's in the detail. How much is enough, for a performance horse? How much is enough for a broodmare, if any? How much do foals need? So we've been on that hindgut train sort of for a while. Obviously, the feed that we have is a high fiber, low sugar feed. So we stuck to that mantra for a very long time now. But it'll be good to zero in, as Bryan will start the summary very shortly, how the focus needs to be on a hindgut. And it's not just the supplementation, because if you've got a horse with poor hindgut health, you've already got a problem. Okay, so the supplements are going to help ease the pain, but you're still not getting to the root cause of the problem, which may be happening through an unbalanced diet or poor nutrition.
Yeah, 100%, Pete. And with this study, we'll just give you a nice little brief outline. So this is for everyone like myself that likes listening to podcasts instead of reading articles. We'll simplify it down so it's not too science-based, because there is a lot of science and statistics in there. So what they did, they tracked these 52 horses for an average of 127 weeks, and they looked at the vet issues like orthopedic, soft tissue, respiratory, gastrointestinal, and also tracking their racing performance through the public database. And this is with every race, their finishing position, official rating, their prize money, and then correlated this to how their health was during the life of being a foal, a weanling, a yearling into their race prep. And in conclusion, they have found that the gut microbiome diversity in the first 28 days of life with the foal has a measurable impact on health and race outcomes years later.
Yeah, that's huge. That's absolutely huge. So, Bryan, you mentioned the keyword diversity. Maybe give an example to our listeners who might want to know what good diversity looks like.
Yeah, so the gut health diversity is basically getting those fiber sources for both your mare and foal to be in variety. So if they're on pasture and then a grain-based feed, that's not fiber diversity. That's just a single native pasture possibly, and then you've got a real low 5% fiber pellet. That's not creating a good bacteria balance, because in the hindgut of the horse, you have good microbes, you got bad microbes, there's fungi in there, there's protozoa. What we're focusing on is those good bacteria types or good bacteria microbes that really are the epicenter of good gut health for your horse. And the way to promote that is through different various fiber sources. So when you look at how we set up a diet, say you're on your pasture, you may have different native pasture varieties within your pasture, but then you might feed a Rhodes grass hay or another grassy hay on top. You got two, then you've got a high fiber feed that is very pure in its ingredient list that has the Faber hulls, which is another fiber source. So you're creating a bulletproof environment within the horse that if one type of good bacteria gets knocked out of balance, the whole thing doesn't wobble out of control and then become more acidic and the bad bacteria take over.
Yeah, the simple summary I'll give is, if you can imagine you've got the small intestine, you've got the hindgut. If you are that farm or that person that's feeding that grain-based feed or a feed that's maybe cool and calm on the bag, but it's really barley, mill run, corn, whatever, that product is actually going through the small intestine. It's not going into the hindgut, so you're not giving that mare or that foal fiber diversity. So this study was based around the hindgut, and obviously we know that fermentation happens in the fine-gut. So where Bryan mentioned is a high fiber feed like the Grain-Free Ultimate that we have, that is actually going to give it another source of fiber diversity. So those trillions of microbes now get exposed to fiber fermentation, which later in life, if they're going to be a racehorse, they're not going to be getting a lot of fiber fermentation in their hindgut as a yearling, as a 2-year-old, as a 3-year-old. So the early exposure is actually going to either set up the horse or it's going to hinder the horse later in its performance career. And Bryan will later obviously outline the data as well with how that affects the performance of the horse. And
it's now the strongest link. So it's basically saying that the mare and the foal, it's basically pre-programming the foal's bacteria or good bacteria blueprint for the rest of its life, which is really amazing in the way Mother Nature has brought this out. So the strongest link for the researchers appeared at just 28 days old, and the foals with higher bacterial diversity at 1 month stayed healthier, avoided respiratory disease, and they performed better on the track, which really proves what we're discussing today. And that critical window of the first 28 days, there was other periods that did show effects, like 14 to 60 days, but that 28 days stood out. What is happening at this age for a foal is it's getting its passive immunity from the mare's colostrum right after birth. So your mare's health is really important. They're actually ingesting some manure at this time to colonize their gut. So looking at the point where Peter just outlined before, if you're overloading your mare with sugar and starch and not feeding the hindgut with enough fiber, it's going to become more acidic in that environment. Their manure will be acidic, and with the foal ingesting that, that's really not setting up its own gut health for the good bacteria to flourish if you're giving the foal a blank canvas and trying to set itself up for life. So when you look at the whole environment that your foal is in that first month of life, it can't be too sterile. And we're going to actually outline another significant finding in the study that highlighted the issue with antibiotic use in that period.
I think it all comes back to the mindset of the breeders. So we've attended a lot of different sales events for foals over the years, and talking to different breeders, they're more worried about getting a foal that's going to be nice and strong and big bone and obviously is not going to be behind the eight ball. The issue is if you're trying to fast track that process from very early in the foal's life, and majority of your diet is focused around that small intestine. As I mentioned previously, you're not getting that diversity in the hindgut. So if you're not getting that diversity in the hindgut, you're going to have a weaker immune system. And if up to 70% of the horse's immune system is in its hindgut, well, how on earth is that horse going to stay healthy when it gets a bit of stress into it, whether it's a yearling or a 2-year-old? So almost what we're sort of summarizing and what our diet sort of focuses on, we're sort of like your insurance policy where you've got this little window of time that you can actually, I wouldn't say bulletproof your horse, but you can actually do something that's in your control. There's something that's in your power to give that foal every opportunity to become that best performance horse. We're not going to change its genetic ability. We're not going to, make an average horse into a superstar, but we don't want that average horse to be behind the eight ball with poor hindgut health, with having issues down the track with whether it's, immunity, whether it's respiratory, whether it's tendons, ligaments, what so forth. So more so about, I think the industry almost needs a mindset change where breeders need to get out of their head and go, oh, well, I'm going to grain a horse. It's going to grow quicker. It's going to get bigger boned. It's not the fact. We've done a previous podcast as well, and I can't remember which episode. Maybe we'll leave a link in the comments where it showed that a horse fed on grain and a horse fed on a strictly high fiber diet, the growth rates were very similar. And I think even there was a point there where the growth plates in some of the fiber horses actually closed slightly quicker than if they were on grain.
Yeah, it was very profound back then when we highlighted on the podcast. And as Peter's saying, we're just putting the odds back in your favor to get the foal or the potential performance horse to their potential ability that they deserve to get to with the very best start to life. And when we look at applying this is not just for racehorses. This could be an endurance horse stud. It could be a high performance stud. What you're doing is you're really blueprinting the engine room of the horse to really be set up for less disease risk or less health issues later on in life and better performance.
Well, Bryan, I have this conversation on the consults all the time. It's, okay, you've got a horse which in essence is a vegetarian / fiber fermenter. So that's the genetics of the horse. But yet now how is giving that horse 6 kilograms of a grain or grain byproduct feed going to have so much benefits to that horse? Obviously, it needs carbohydrates, it needs glycogen stores, it needs everything else. I'm generalizing here, but all we're talking about is balance. Okay, don't forget the hindgut. It's very important. Everyone seems to put all the focus on a small intestine. Protein. Grain. This. Don't forget the hindgut. If the hindgut is only getting filled with roughage, that's not enough.
Yeah, 100%. You're trying to support the whole diet in balance, and it is still alarming that we do hear of yearlings being fed 8 kgs of a grain, which is quite shocking. So I think the message is, if you are a breeder, if you are a potential buyer of a young horse, to get that history of how they're fed, how the broodmare is being fed, and how they're looked after. This also includes how stressful the environment is for the broodmare. There is links to the amount of stress impacts their hindgut health, which impacts the foal's hindgut health now, as we can see. And the next thing, which is a big risk, is antibiotic use in that first month. And we know there's certain conditions that you need to use it if there is complications with the foal. But if you're using it for a generalized just in case or insurance use. The impact of antibiotics in the first month of the life of the foal, it is now correlated with a higher risk of respiratory disease later in life, worse overall health, and it actually lowers their racing performance.
Yeah, that's huge. And look, I remember when I was young, a long time ago, Brian, I used to get tonsillitis all the time, and I think my parents, obviously they didn't know what they know now, but I used to be on antibiotics all the time, and I was sick always as well. So an example I like to give is, if we're healthy, we're exercising, we're trying to look after ourselves, we don't take antibiotics to prevent from getting sick. We only take antibiotics when there's a need because we are sick.
Correct. That's well put, Pete. And in this study, none of the foals given antibiotics in the first month actually had a respiratory disease at the time. So this means the antibiotics, not the sickness, were the likely cause of the later health and performance problems.
I think the industry is very sort of ingrained in routine. So look, we're not saying antibiotics are bad. By all means, obviously they're required when you've got a bacterial infection, not when you've got a viral infection. So I think most of us know that. But giving antibiotics routinely because that's what's been done for the last 20 years, well, no, that's not right, because this science pretty much everything goes, you should not be doing that because you are hindering performance in the future for that particular foal. And, if there's anyone out there that would like to say, well, yeah, antibiotics are healthy in the first 28 days of a foal's life, we'd love to hear, or even if they wanted to contact these researchers and tell them why it is healthy, because the research that they did over this long period of time, which was 100 odd weeks, proved that antibiotics actually had a performance disadvantage later in that foal's life.
Yeah, it would be a matter of going to a stud and asking how is the history of this foal's health in its first month, and it can actually lower the risk of what you're taking on, and then also might, if you still take on the horse, look out for trying to help that immune system get better or colonate that hindgut even better if you can have an impact later on in life.
Look, I think if you're a stud listening to this, I'd be asking all these questions, with your veterinary people that you work with. It's not to knock anyone on the head or to point, not point fingers in people's faces, but this is a pretty groundbreaking study, which is really recent. And, what we were doing 20 years ago, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, well, if there is routine antibiotics, and I'm sure there would be in some studs from the day that the foal is born, you may want to rethink that routine, because there's no science behind whatever the theory was to be doing that. The new science has come out as that you should not be doing it because there is no advantage in doing it.
Yeah, 100%. And we know there's always exceptions to the rule, and there may be a good result come out of it, but what this study highlights is trying to lower that risk of poor performance later in life and those health issues that have been seen. And they even studied in these particular horses specific bacteria families that caused the issues in the horse. So, and I won't go into the full science names behind it because it doesn't really matter. You can look at it in the report that I link. But breathing problems were linked to a specific bacteria. Skin and soft tissue infections were also linked to a specific one. So this suggests that the gut bacteria may reflect what's happening at other infection sites in the body. So the whole gut is being that whole center point of your horse's health in a major way.
Well, I think what is happening within that first 28 days, if that foal does get that antibiotic, it wipes out, billions of good bacteria and bad bacteria. So basically the trillions that are supposed to be there, they're no longer at those amounts. So unless they get put back in at pretty large amounts, that foal is going to be pretty much behind the eight ball from that first 28 days. Is that how you're seeing it?
Yeah, definitely. And it comes through that fiber diversity, but also you can try with digestive supplements. You're going to have to feed a lot, and I don't think it's fully proven that you can only rely on a digestive supplement to recolonize. It's going to have to come through a good fiber foundation.
Absolutely. And look, with a lot of these supplements, they're all in, maybe not all, but majority are in powdered form. If they have got a carrier which is not a natural carrier, whether it's a glucose or what so forth, well, is that really helping the fiber fermentation? So you're better off having a high fiber pellet like our grain-free ultimate with probiotics, prebiotics, all your B vitamins, zinc, copper, manganese, calcium, phosphorus, balanced magnesium. We've done all the heavy lifting for these breeders, it's just getting the information out there where I mentioned, I mean, look, we're both passionate about the hindgut. I think the hindgut is probably the most overlooked section of the horse that breeders don't really take much notice of. They're more about obviously growing the foal and routine. A lot of them do have good pasture, and sometimes they ask, well, if you've got grass up to your knees, why on earth are you giving that foal 6 kilos or 8 kilos? To me, it just makes no logical sense at all.
Yeah, and we've made a great impact over the years in trying to lower that volume of hard feed and upping that roughage portion, as you've heard Peter and I go on like a broken record in previous podcasts. So I think we're starting to change with the results that we're getting and the stud results that are coming out, with looking at that hindgut as the first part. And as with a lot of things in the industry, when horse owners have success with a traditional way of feeding, like what we hear in the industry is, so back in the day, someone would feed grain over grain over grain. It doesn't mean this is the right way of feeding a horse when the horse's majority of the energy comes from fiber fermentation. This is what we're looking at now, and it shouldn't be like a results-driven thing that was just available back in the day.
Yeah, and look, science is always there to be debated. Science is always changing. That's why it's never ending. That's why it's science. So, science 20 years ago was different to what science is now. And these obviously studies, these trials that these researchers did was paramount. Obviously, it took them a long time. That's what's only sort of come to light last year. So they had to do it. I mean, 100 odd weeks. It's almost a 3-year study. Yeah,
it's very good and robust, and a good sample size. Not 2 or 3 horses. It's 52.
Yes.
So it's very comprehensive, and it really connects with a new scientific field in the human world called sportomics, which studies how an athlete's body and the microbiome interact. So we're looking at even human health and our own gut microbiome. So most human studies are now focusing on how the microbiome changes during training or competition. But this study that we're talking about now is the first to show that the microbiome begins before the training even starts for the future athletic ability of the horse.
Is that like, Brian, when we have a shot competition with Sam Booker, we prime our gut lining with beers first?
I don't know if it goes back to when I was an 18-year-old kid or teenager and I had some alcohol again. Legally.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
Bit off topic, but no, absolutely. Everything starts before that horse even knows that it's going to be an athlete, pretty much. So, look, as I said, it's about having dialogue. It's not about pointing fingers. I do hope that a lot of breeders listen to this podcast and just ask the question. Obviously they've got a team around them. Just because you've done it 30 years ago, or dad did it, granddad did it, great-granddad did it, and you've had results, that's great. But I gave this example, I think, in a previous podcast where I think it was Carl Lewis 20 years ago in the 100-meter sprint. He ran 9.98 seconds to win the gold medal. The athlete that finished last at the Paris Olympics ran 9.97. So Carl Lewis, if he was running last year, would have come last in that particular race. But yet he won the gold medal 20 years ago. So what that tells me is that science changes. Obviously, the nutrition changes, the training changes, the recovery methods that they're doing these days are obviously better to what they were 20 years ago. But it seems like that we're still stuck in the Stone Age with feeding and just with horses. It sort of puzzles me a bit.
Yeah, I think the wheel is turning, and I think with more education, more awareness, and then the results, we're seeing it in a lot of top performing stables around Australia that they are looking into the hindgut as a focus for performance. And I think this is just another piece of evidence that should be taken notice for the foal in its early stage of life.
If you had to summarise, what does that mean for stud owners?
So if you are a stud owner, looking at all your protocols within your farm in terms of looking at how sterile the environment is, how stressed the broodmares are, looking at the broodmare's diet, particularly in that 3rd trimester, not overdoing the sugar and starch within the diet to then help support the hindgut health of the horse, because we know the foal will ingest some manure and colonize itself. But then it's also getting other microbes even from when it's suckling for the milk, or when it's accessing the milk from the mother.
If you're in a routine, obviously, with feeding, and you've got big silos all over the property with your chosen feed, we're not saying drop that and join us. What we're saying is if what we know from the study is true, which we know that it's true, probably the last trimester of the mare's sort of foaling cycle is very important, and then obviously the first month when the foal is born. So this is where I think, if it's not our high fiber feed, even if you look into another company's feeds, you look at that last 3 months and the first month of the foal, try to get that fiber diversity in there. Make sure you're getting the high fiber, low sugar. You're going to get high amounts of sugar out of your grass anyway, let alone the grain or grain byproduct feed you may be feeding. So there's no harm in changing that diet for 2, 3, 4 months while that foal is growing, while the mare obviously is getting ready to foal down. That way, you're giving the mare the diversity. The foal's taking that diversity out of the mare while it's inside. The mare's still getting that fiber diversity once the foal is born, and then the foal is taking that diversity through milk as well. So it's critical, that 28 days.
Yeah, and to summarise all that, the foals with the diverse, well-developed gut microbes early in life, they stay healthier, they develop stronger immune systems, suffer fewer respiratory and soft tissue issues, and perform better on the racetrack. And that was their summary for this study. And avoiding early antibiotics, supporting the natural microbiome exposure appeared to be two of the most powerful tools any stud farm can use. And for the first time, this science shows that gut health in early life helps build the athlete long before the training begins. So I think when we look at what we do at Sen, we provide feed programs for mares and foals that is clean, fresh fiber source that boosts that microbiome diversity. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, you're going to
need a shot of vodka after.
what we offer, and if you don't even know what we do at Sen, we work alongside your pasture and hay. We make that the center of attention and not the hard feed. Our feed does balance the deficiencies in this and delivers high quality protein, high fiber, low sugar, low starch with zero rancid oils within the pellet, no fillers or contamination, which just goes on our mantra of a pure, fresh ingredient list, which impacts your horse's health, the gut health in particular, in a very positive way.
Yeah, that's really well summarised, Brian. I don't have sort of too much to add to that. We're 150 podcasts deep in it now, and the hindgut has always been our focus point. And as you mentioned, we do structure the diets around roughage. And look, if you've got a farm that you've got bare dirt and you're forced to feed a hay, whether you've got an oaten hay or a lucerne or a barley, we can make every hay work as well. We start with the roughage and then we work the diet around the roughage. Obviously, whatever holes we need to plug in that hay. As Brian mentioned, if you've got pasture, you may get away with just pasture. You may or may not need additional hay, depending on what the protein level and everything else in that pasture is.
Yeah, I totally agree, Pete. And I think we are up to, are we over 150 5-star reviews on Spotify?
We're at 140, Brian.
140. Oh, put the cart before the horse there. Yeah, so if you do enjoy these podcasts, please share with your friends. This study can not only be applied to the racing industry, but also other performance industries as well, because it's the energy system of the horse that you're setting up, and the correlation to performance is very profound. If you want to join the conversation and show off your Sen success as well, we have our Sen users group that you can join. And also we offer this really good service, which is a free diet analysis. And what we do is we gather the information about your current diet, and we'll take you through the reasons to feed or not to feed, or to change to a better profile according to your horse's environments and needs and goals.
Yeah, look, and in a summary too, I find that the less gut health products your horse has, the better the quality of the feed that you're feeding. So in essence is that, if you're feeding no gut health supplements and your horse is pretty healthy poos and everything like that, you're probably feeding correctly in a way, So what we want to do is we want to just get the information out that fiber is healthy. Horses, young horses will still grow nice and strong with a diversity of fiber, protein, fat, starch, and sugar. We just don't want to be lopsided to one side and just focus all our energy in filling that small intestine, and like forgetting little brother, the hindgut, sort of to leave it be on its own and not get any love, because that's the last thing that we want to do.
Yeah, that's well said, Pete. And I'll leave all the links to the article in the notes, and I've done a nice summary on our website too if you want to take another read.
Awesome, guys. And look, if you've got any questions, this has been a pretty in-depth analysis. So if you're a stud owner or a breeder, it doesn't matter what type of horse you breed, you can call me and Bryan. Obviously, we've got our landline number. If you're lucky, you may get our mobile numbers as well, but only if you're lucky.
We get a few texts late at night with a few questions, but no, we're always happy to help out. We won't divert you to an AI answering machine like some companies.
Absolutely. So, guys, thanks for your time, and hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast.
Thanks, guys.